Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, the High Court weighs in on whether the Prime Minister can be forced to resign once he steps down to become alternate premier. Meanwhile, coronavirus Czar Professor Ronnie replacement is announced as politicians continue to discuss Israel's exit strategy. And finally, an Israeli artisan calling out for Wonderwoman. Can the amazing Gal Gadot come to the rescue? Our top story tonight, the High Court of Justice in Israel today hearing petitions aimed at ousting Prime Minister Netanyahu from his office. Just one of several petitions with the Israeli High Court today in deliberations. The petition ultimately aiming to establish the possibility of forcing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to resign in light of his pending corruption trials, at least as soon as he becomes alternate Prime Minister. As part of Netanyahu's unity agreement with Defense Minister Benny Gantz and his Blue and White Party, Netanyahu is set to step down as Prime Minister in November 2021 to become alternate Prime Minister. And it's at this point that opponents want to force Netanyahu's ousting. But to do this, they need to first prove that the power-sharing deal underpinning the government unity is unconstitutional. The petition, being authored by the Movement for the Quality of Government in Israel, the left-wing Meretz Party, and the Guardians of Israeli Democracy organization. Now, aside from challenging the constitutionality of the rotation agreement itself, petitioners also argue that Netanyahu will lose his diplomatic immunity once he steps down to become alternate premier. Though Attorney General Avichai Mandelblit, who himself indicted Netanyahu, recently told the High Court that he views the alternate position as constitutional. But at any rate, the court hearings are being broadcast live to the public, the timeline for a decision being unclear. Finally, meanwhile, attacking the coalition from a different angle, opposition leader and Yesh Atid party head Yair Lapid has announced that if a national budget is not passed by next week, then his Yesh Atid Telem Unity Party will initiate a proposal to dissolve the Knesset with a vote of no confidence next Wednesday, and return to a fourth round of elections. So what will the Israeli High Court decide in the face of mounting pressures against Prime Minister Netanyahu? Joining us now to analyze is Israeli criminal law expert and attorney Sharon Nahari. Sharon, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so first of all, there are several petitions right now before the High Court today. What do you make of them?
I think generally the question is if it's constitutional or not constitutional that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will be the alternate Prime Minister based on this unique agreement that he made with the other side, Benny Gantz. Usually the Prime Minister enjoyed the protection, the immunity of continue to be a Prime Minister, even though there is an indictment against him. And also in the case of appeal, until it's finished, he can be the Prime Minister. The question is if he still can be the alternate Prime Minister after Gantz will take to be the head of the Prime Minister, according to the unique agreement that they make. If it's a constitutional, he can still be under immunity or he need to resign. This is the main question.
Well, that's exactly it, because under their agreement, Gantz made sure to include the fact that the alternate Prime Minister enjoys all of the same benefits of being the full Prime Minister, and that was agreed upon in a basic law that was passed in order to form this unity government. So do these petitions hold water?
Correct. This is made especially to have a good ground for the argument that he can still be alternate Prime Minister, although the general law constitution say that he need to be resigned. But now they make a special law that protect the immunity, even though he's the second Prime Minister, which called the alternate Prime Minister. And this is an interesting question. I think that the higher court will not interfere and not cancel this law, and he can be because they all understand that Benny Gantz and Netanyahu will be together, even though Netanyahu will be the alternate Prime Minister in this case. I think it's still realistic and good that he will be under the immunity, that he can run the state of Israel with Benny Gantz together. He can do the things and not be bothered to be resigned before the verdict is achieved.
So then, given your analysis just now, do these petitions amount to anything more than, a political argument, or do the authors of these petitions actually believe that it'll be accepted by the High Court?
I can understand the petition to court. I can understand the argument. I can understand the people, because usually only the prime minister can enjoy this. But in this special case, because of the rotation contract they made, Benjamin Netanyahu need to be the alternate prime minister and need to be protected under the right of the prime minister in this specific case, I think, which is not a regular case. That's why I think the court should not be interrupted.
Okay, Attorney Sharon Nahari, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. A nice day.
In other news, the head of Sudan's ruling council is now again touting the benefits of the new peace between Sudan and Israel. The government leader telling national media on Monday that, in fact, they are the biggest winners in this deal. Nittany Manson reports.
نتعرض لابتزاز اطلاقا. نحن نريد ان نتحصل منافع، حتى شاورنا في هذا الامر وخطينا المصلحه حقتنا وين؟ انه هل هذا الامر فيه فائده لنا ولا ما فيه؟ وجدنا ان هنالك فوائد، نحن دي فرصه انه نكسبها، نحن قد نكون نحن الكسبنا اكثر من الاطراف الاخرى، لانه نحن بنفتكر انه هم محتاجين لنا في هذا الزمن، نحن ماذا نستفيد من حوجتهم لنا الان.
General Abdel Fattah Burhan, the head of Sudan's Sovereign Council and Transitional Government, saying these words in an interview on Sudanese state TV, explaining that the agreement has in fact been in the works for a long time behind closed doors, and that everyone necessary was involved in negotiations. So what is Sudan getting out of the deal, making it the biggest winner? Well, first, Burhan points out the removal of Sudan from the United States state sponsors of terror blacklist, explaining that without the agreement with Israel, the relisting may not have happened until deep into 2021, if at all. Additionally, Burhan says the deal is necessary to end Sudan's isolation, bringing the nation back into the global system where it can benefit economically and technologically from the whole world. And this, as Burhan insists on relabeling the agreement as a whole as a reconciliation and not a normalization.
نحن لما نتحدث عن رفع العقوبات عن السودان لا نستطيع أن نتحدث بمعزل عن التطبيع مع إسرائيل. أنا أفضل دائما أن أسميه صلح بدل تطبيع، لأنه نحن الآن بنعمل اتفاقية صلح، والصلح عمل مشروع حتى مع الأعداء، مع كل جهة يمكن أن تبرم الصلح الذي يصب في مصلحة المتطرفين.
Meanwhile, in the wake of Israel's third landmark peace agreement with an Arab Muslim state since this summer, Israel's ambassador to the United States and United Nations took to the virtual plenum for his first address before the United Nations Security Council on Monday, where he blasted the Security Council members for ignoring the recent changes in the Middle East. Specifically, Ambassador Gilad Erdan is calling out the world body for failing to change its decades-old talking points, while the Middle East is changing before their eyes. Joining me to discuss is former Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, Dani Danon. Ambassador, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, now Gilad Erdan, he said that in his 2 months in New York, he's seen a jarring dissonance between what the UN focuses on and what's actually going on in the Middle East, adding that the Council must recommit itself to pursuing peace and security and not to let politics dictate actions in the region. Is there any hope of this happening?
But let's look what happened in the last few weeks. We signed a peace agreement with the UAE, with Bahrain, now with Sudan. And instead of speaking about that, the Security Council, they still speak about the Palestinian issue. This is unfortunate. It shows the hypocrisy of the Security Council, the UN. And I remember when I was sitting there for 5 years, I always told them, you should speak about the Middle East, not only about the Palestinian issue. Once you will actually deal with the global issues, you will be able to help the Palestinians. I think it will not happen tomorrow, but in the long run, the more agreements that we will sign with more Arab countries, they will have to recognize it.
Well, that actually brings me to my next question, because Ambassador Erdan also said that the United States has demonstrated for the first time in 25 years that a different approach to the region can yield results. Will the rest of the world actually recognize this fact? Because again, up until now, the status quo was that without peace with the Palestinians, there won't be peace with the rest of the Arab world, but clearly that's not the case.
So we spoke in the past, and now we are proving that we are changing the paradigm. Before achieving peace with the Palestinians, we have to achieve peace with our neighboring moderate Arab countries. That is exactly what is happening now. I think it will take time until those nations will acknowledge it. You know, when we speak with them directly and we have bilateral talks, they speak about it. But when it comes to the multilateral arena, to the UN, they usually tend to stick to the old points and blame Israel for everything. I think in the near future, once we will come together with more Arab countries to speak to those nations, we will be able to build coalition and to move forward, even in a hostile place like the UN.
Well, so is the United Nations Security Council at this point in time a lost cause, as Ambassador Erdan hinted that it may be?
So I don't want to call the Security Council or the UN a lost cause. We should criticize, we should reform the UN bodies, we should ask them to focus on the main issues. But the very fact that you have a place where you can sit down, have a talk, have a negotiation between the nations, I think it speaks for itself. So yes, we want the UN to function, but we have to reform the UN and to make sure that they focus on the main problems, on the main issues.
Ambassador Dani Danon, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Aaron.
Now, speaking of regional peace, many say that there is no way it'll happen anytime soon, at least not between Israel and Lebanon, where Iranian proxy Hezbollah and years of resentment following 2 wars remain. But the many may be wrong. Claudine Aoun, a well-known public figure and daughter of Lebanese President Michel Aoun, now repeating her argument that peace with Israel can be achieved, albeit with a couple of conditions. The first being agreed-upon borders to solve the issues related to land. This, as Israel's maritime border with Lebanon is already currently being negotiated. Second, Aoun says that she supports the adopting of a defense strategy that would defend Lebanon while Lebanon is attacked, or when Lebanon is attacked. And third, of course, an agreement between Israel and the Palestinians. But assuming these conditions are met, Aoun tweets that everyone supports the principle of peace, that she hopes to visit Jerusalem, and that she would not object to the prospect of an agreement between the 2 countries. Of course, Aoun is still seeing her fair share of criticism too. Some on social media accusing her of being a traitor, as Israel and Lebanon are still technically in a state of war. Moving on now to our daily coronavirus update. Big news in Israel's COVID-19 response team. The Israeli coronavirus czar, Professor Ronnie is being replaced, and his replacement has now officially been named. Beginning Wednesday this week, the role of official Israeli coronavirus commissioner, or czar, will begin transitioning from Professor Ronnie to Professor Nachman Ash. Ash, having served as the former head of the IDF Medical Corps from 2007 to 2011, as well as the former head doctor for the Sayeret Matkal Commando Unit. Gamzu, for his part, will then end his term in the role on November 13, just 4 months after assuming the position. Though reports are saying that he was always committed to leaving sometime in November to return to his job as the head of the Tel Aviv Soraski Medical Center. Promising pedigree aside, however, the question is whether Ash will be able to continue the downwards trend in infections put into motion by Gamzu's now famous traffic light program, especially given the new spike in infections in the Israeli Arab sector following a supposed surge in weddings, as well as the government's decision to further ease lockdown measures by as early as next week. Deputy Health Minister Yoav Kish even explaining that the decisions may come at a cost.
את צודקת, אני גם הלוואי והיה אפשר לפתוח את הכל, אני גם בעד לפתוח קניונים, הכל טוב, אין שום בעיה. הבעיה היחידה היא שככל שאתה פותח יותר דברים, אז יש יותר התקהלויות, אתה מגדיל את הסיכון, אתה מקטין, ההר עולה כלפי מעלה, והשאלה הגדולה, האם אתה לא במעשה הזה בעצם מקבע שיותר אתה לא תרד בתחלואה, ואז לא יעזור 5 שלבים, 8 שלבים, אנחנו נשאר על השלב הזה.
Meanwhile, Israelis are also eagerly waiting to see if Ash will enact any changes in the government's pandemic response, given a new report just released by the State Comptroller's Office, which focuses mainly on the period between July and September. The state body now blasting the government's handling of the virus over the summer, saying that COVID testing has suffered delays, that the Education Ministry is woefully unprepared to support remote learning programs, that the Shin Bet and police tracking programs were failures, that contact tracing apparatuses are inefficient, and that on top of everything else, Israel is unprepared for the coming winter flu virus. Still, the Israeli Health Ministry on Tuesday is reporting just a 2.1 positivity rate, the lowest overnight positive infection rate since June. with longtime COVID hotspot and ultra-Orthodox city Bnei Brak even now turning from a red city to a green city. The new active number of cases in Israel then likewise dropping now to 12,890, with just 780 new overnight infections, 483 people remaining in serious condition, and the death toll rising to 2,452. Several COVID wards open for the last 6 to 7 months are even now being closed. Hadassah Ein Kerem head Professor Dror Mevorach announcing the welcomed closures on social media. In related news, new reports from authorities within the Israel Psychiatric Association now showing that upwards of 20% of Israelis, or nearly 1.6 million people, could be suffering from acute emotional and psychological distress as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. Joining me to break down the report is Israeli psychologist Dr. Camila Forkash-Lavan. Camila, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, now, the head of the IPA, Dr. Tzvi Fischel, he says that aside from the economic and health issues and damages related to the coronavirus, the lockdowns took away our coping mechanisms, like going to see films, friends, entertainment events, and other normal life routines. What is the manifestation of this loss long term?
Long term, it's going to be devastating, especially because we have a whole generation of children that right now are going to be affected. Yes, so let's talk a little bit about the coping mechanisms as far as the adults are concerned. Yes, where exactly we can't go out, we can't really meet anyone, we can't go to a movie. Everything that we used to use in order to cope basically isn't there. So there is this stressful event where in the beginning we didn't even know how dangerous, not dangerous, who's going to die, how many people are going to die, is it everywhere, it's not like what to even do to protect ourselves. Now, on top of that, we also can't go to have Shabbat dinner, or we can't go out for a coffee or anything like that. Obviously, as adults, we're more stressed. And who you think is handling the brunt of that stress at home? The
Assuming
children.
the kids and the elderly,
Right.
are getting the most of it.
Okay.
Well, so that brings me to my next question. How do you prepare for or address an entire generation that you are saying now is likely going to be traumatized?
So I think that first let's talk about some of the effects, just so that it's clear, and then I would like to go to your question as well. Basically, again, the grunt the children are handling, and also, of course, the elderly. So for children, there are no kindergartens. First grade, second grade is started still from last year. The education, of course, is suffering very much. Social development is suffering very much. Children that just started, let's say, kindergarten, the association is basically because they're being yanked away always, that social situations are just anxiety-provoking because they didn't have the time to calm down yet and actually play and have fun. So this is a very big problem, yes? Now, for the elderly, as we know, they move less. They're not, the social contact that they would have with their grandchildren, which we know there's a lot of research on longevity and happiness, it's very important. Now, that's not there. So I'm not even sure at this point, and I'm sure the research is going to be there very soon, and some of it is already there, that I'm not sure that the death rates that we're trying to save with COVID, and some of them are we're not even sure if it's directly to COVID or because of the pre-existing conditions, that they will be more than potential death rates due to the stress and the not moving around.
Well, so again, though, how do you address an entire generation that's traumatized? How do you deal with it?
So it's very important to understand the effects first, right? Because we can, on one hand, talk to the parents and try to make them understand that the more calm you are in the family, the more calm your children will be. But I think the way we do everything, the way we handle it socially is very important, and to understand that the way our solutions are socially, yes, should be perhaps different, not always with a seger.
All right, Camila, thank you so much. All right, now the northern Israeli Nafach army base is now learning that its namesake may be a lot older than previously thought, with Israeli antiquities authorities, excavators, discovering a 1,700-year-old boundary stone. But to get to all the details, it's time for Can You Dig It with Anat Harel. Anat, I love that introduction. Thanks for being with us. How are you?
You're welcome.
What is this boundary stone? Why is it so remarkable?
Well, the remarkable part about it is not that the name has been preserved, okay, because in hundreds of places all around Israel, ancient names have been preserved from different populations, from the Aramaic and the Hebrew that was spoken at the time, and then the Latinized versions, and then the Arabic versions. What's remarkable here is that this particular place was not settled for about 1,000 years. And still, when the village, the newer villages that the Syrians built on top, they actually maintained the name. How they knew what that name was, what Nafach was, we don't know.
So, I mean, how does that happen? How do we discover settlement names by, that match up to today by coincidence?
Okay, so usually it's not a coincidence. Usually the name has been preserved because there has been a settlement there forever. Either they were Jews or they were Arabs or they were Greeks or they were Romans, whatever, Mamluks or Ottomans. The name is preserved. In this case, we don't really know how it happened. The last time this place was settled on the Golan Heights was by the Mamluks, and the Mamluks had an inn there. It was like a caravansary, a place on the road. The roads were very, very important at the time, the ancient roads that went from Damascus, from Mesopotamia over to Egypt and so forth. And for some reason, when the Mamluks built their inn for travelers, they found a rock, and that rock was a boundary stone from 1700 years ago that in Greek said, this is the village of Nafach, and they used it as the cover to a gravestone, to a grave. And the archaeologists discovered it now. They discovered it as the cover of a grave, but it had an inscription on it from 1700 years ago. So the Mamluks, who built this in the 13th and 14th century, didn't really know what it was. They found it, and it was a reuse of a stone that they found.
An incredible discovery, an incredible coincidence.
Yeah.
Anat, thank you so much for telling us all about it.
You are welcome.
Finally, have you ever been to the artist colony of Tzfat in northern Israel? Well, if you have, then you probably know about the incredible and iconic wax candle factory in the city, where master candle artist Moshe Chaim Gress has a new mission. Now, Gress has been an artist for Tzfat's iconic candle factory for over 21 years, and he's behind some of the most famous pieces in the shop, including candle sculptures of Noah's Ark, Samson, and a David and Goliath scene, all made entirely out of wax. But now he has a new project, Havdalah candle swords, some of which include candle lightsabers, the candle sword of Gryffindor, and now even the iconic Wonderwoman sword. Gress's only question that remains then is this: will Israel's Wonder Woman Gal Gadot accept it?
Shalom, I'm Moshe Chaim of MC Levy's Candle Alchemy. For many years now, I've been the world's only candle sculptor and maker of Havdalah candle swords. A Havdalah candle sword is a handle that has a replaceable blade, which is a candle. This one is a katana, and can be used for making Havdalah epic again. This one's for Hanukkah. It's a Maccabi sword. Here is a lightsaber from Star Wars. Here is the sword of Gryffindor from Harry Potter. Very long. And most importantly, I've been trying to get this to Gal Gadot. It's a Wonder Woman sword from the movie The Sword of Athena. I would love to get this to Gal Gadot. I would love to see a photo of her doing Havdalah.
So there you have it. And Gal, we eagerly await your reply from Moshe. On that note, though, let's take a look at the weather forecast. What a shocker. Tonight should be clear to partly cloudy again, with lows hovering around 68 degrees Fahrenheit or 20 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow you can expect a slight drop in temperatures for an average high of 81 Fahrenheit or 27 degrees Celsius. And now let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel. I'm sorry, is that dog hula hooping? How do you even teach a dog to do that? That's amazing, and he's good at it. I'm so impressed right now. The music was a little alarming, though. All right, that is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.39 shekels to the American dollar and 2.57 shekels to the Canadian dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube and Roku TV pages. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you so much for watching.